Hello? Is anyone there? This is Grim Grinner, on all channels.
Infected attacks rampant in the GAT. The government failed. Unified into the corporation.
Have a safe day.
Desolation. An endless wasteland.
Nothing but static.
Searching for a shred of hope.
Welcome to the Wastes.
Chris was wiping down the bar, staring at the makeshift stained glass window near the entrance at the sunset. His thoughts were clicks and clicks away, dwelling on different times before he became owner of an outpost just out of range of corporate patrols, when he ran as an independent courier, and before that wasn't important. Not anymore, at least. That's what he told himself in the late nights when most of the patrons had retired to one of the few rooms or their small camps outside, and he could relax in the threadbare armchair he had in his back room with a whiskey and some house jerky. The house jerky this week was particularly good, since he had dried it out with a hot sauce glaze courtesy of Sam Saction the last time he passed through. That old man always seemed to have exactly what he needed when he came by, and with prices that low, it was always a bargain. I'm so looking forward to winding down with some of that tonight, he thought as he zoned out, focused on the colors shining into the bar. The sound of tires and the sudden hush of the camps and patrons inside brought a swift end to the reverie, though. That was never a good sign. Doors to a car slamming, followed by an all too familiar sound of boots on hard dirt, were even worse. Before the door opened, Chris was reaching for the ray gun under the bar, his hand finding the familiar grip and clasping it firmly. 3 corporate agents stood in the doorway, each one in a monochrome suit, ray guns on their belts, scatterguns strapped to their backs, and all 3 of them wearing polished masks that hid any features that would have even shown a shred of humanity. The one taking lead was an elite, marked with a different badge that was the only shred of color on any of them. That meant the other 2 were standard creeps, and could be easier to take down if push came to shove. Hopefully, it didn't. Evening, agents. Sorry to say, but we're almost closing up for the night. You might want to find a more welcoming outpost to wet your whistles. Chris tried to steady his voice, resisting the pull towards an attempt at intimidation. There were already too many wastelanders readying their weapons for a firefight, so the best course of action right now was to try and keep the peace. Chris, the elite started, their voice modulated by their mask to again remove humanity and any sense of who might be behind it. Let's have a chat, shall we? Sorry, I try not to engage with corpos on business hours, so if you don't mind fucking off, and maybe we can chat another time. So much for trying to keep the peace, Chris berated himself. Hopefully he could keep up the strong front just long enough to make this work, and get these creeps at the door again. Adjusting his stance, Chris unhooked the ray gun from under the bar, ready for whatever the elite's response may be. Oh, Chris, I don't think you want to turn me away, do you? The elite's voice had an edge and something else that Chris couldn't quite place, but he also didn't want to risk a shootout at the bar. Fine, this way. Chris opened up the bar and directed the 3 creeps into the back room, and winced as the elite took a seat in his chair. There was nothing for it now, so Chris also didn't shy away from showing that he had a ray gun with him, and placed it on the table between them. Ah, the old Gen 3 model. Fantastic piece, to be sure. Almost vintage. The elite's voice showed the slightest hint of sarcasm through the modulator as they placed their own, newer ray gun on the table. Of course, we've had some upgrades since then. What do you want? And be snappy about it. I don't want anyone getting suspicious. This is a corporate-free outpost, after all. Chris felt himself flowing into an old way of speaking and struggled to catch himself. Oh, you need need not worry about your reputation with your patrons. Should this conversation go poorly, you'll be hailed as a hero to whoever survives out there. The mirrored mask reflected back to Chris the quick glance he took at the Elite's ID badge. Elite Agent H-1265, aka Hayes. So you made Elite after all. Chris felt confidence surging and let himself slip just enough. I always knew you would, Hayes. Ah, there you are, Agent. Hayes was cut off by 2 shots from Chris's ray gun, taking out the lower rank creeps with cracked shots through their necks. Chris leveled the barrel at Hayes, aiming directly where the agent's eyes would be behind the mask. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying, especially not at the cost you're asking. That gives you 2 options. You pull out of here in that car before it's turned to scrap piles, or you end up like your friends here and I add your badge to my collection. Chris's voice was cold, and he kept his aim trained on Hayes as they stood and made their way to the door. So it's true then. Goodbye, Chris. Have a safe day. Once the door shut, Chris slumped in his chair, shaking. It had been years since he had needed to be that person. After a few deep breaths, he got up and dragged the 2 bodies of the creeps over to the back door. Chris made sure to grab their badges, as well as their weapons, tossing the latter in a box under his work table. Opening a panel in the wall near his chair, Chris pinned the 2 ID badges to a small bit of fabric that had a collection of almost 2 dozen others, with one pinned separately at the top. Elite Agent C-014, aka Cola. After closing the panel, Chris poured himself a double and grabbed a piece of jerky, sitting down in his chair, and listened to the voices outside shout obscenities after Hayes as they drove off. Have a safe day, Agent. Welcome to The Waste is a Wasteland podcast brought to you by Edward Grimgrinner Hutchinson, but made possible by Wastelanders like you. If you'd like to support the show in a fun way or get some merch, check me out on Patreon or on Etsy. The links to both of those, as well as all my social media, can be found at linktree.com/welcome to the wastes. See you in the wastes.